So, the talk tonight is masculinity. And just to set it up a little bit, I never intended to give this talk ever in my life. Like, this is not something that I thought I would end up doing, but I feel like there's so much garbage noise out there. Somebody had to say something to kind of push back against it. So that's what I'm going to try and do and see what happens. To start, though, I thought it would be fun to bring in a little piece of something that I noticed yesterday and then noticed again today, which was kind of cool because of the timing of it all. So yesterday was the 70th anniversary of the discovery of DNA. There was a guy named James Watson and Francis Crick who discovered DNA and then got the credit for it, and NPR had a show on it yesterday, and they eventually got the Nobel Prize for this. But it's also a fantastic example of why we need to have this talk that we're going to have tonight, because there was a third person, and her name was Rosalind Franklin. And NPR forgot to mention her yesterday. So today, NPR did an official apology on the start of Women's History Month and said, oops, our bad, we forgot Rosalind. And that's funny because, well, so did the Nobel Prize, and so did all the scientists at the time, who failed to mention that had she not done the things she did, for example, she's the person who X-rayed DNA for the first time. So she's the first person to create an image that we could see of DNA. She died super young, she was in her 30s. But had she not made the discoveries she had made, Watson and Crick certainly wouldn't have made the discoveries that they made. Like, she was necessary component to this. Anyway, all right, so having said that, I want to do something unusual in the sense that it probably doesn't feel like it fits, but I think we should do this. And it's this. It's to acknowledge the absolutely impossibleness of your existence. So I don't mean us as a species. There's 8 billion of us. We're clearly doing fine. Well, I mean, for now anyway. Rabbit populations go. I suspect we do the same. It's just we do it on a longer scale, right? It doesn't take us 10, 12 years to do the boom. But anyway, what I mean is the impossibility of you as an individual. So statistically, think of the pieces that go into the fact that you exist. So I'll do a personal story that I actually got to thinking about last week. So I think I actually said it in one of my classes because it was just so weird. And it's this: when my dad was, I think he was a senior, he might have been a junior in high school, his math teacher came up to him and said, "Where are you applying to college?" And my dad said, I'm not going to college. And the math teacher went, "No, dude, you're too brilliant to not go to college. You really need to go to college." At which point my dad said, I'm the 6th of 7 kids. Nobody in my family has ever gone to college. That's just not a thing we do. And the guy talks him into it, and he goes to what at the time was Houghton Tech, I think it's Michigan Tech now, and he gets an engineering degree and he becomes a geophysicist. And that's the only reason I exist. Had that high school teacher not had that conversation, my father would have never gotten a job for Aramco where he met my mother. What are the odds that he could have ever, as a lumberjack or a miner or a farmer or whatever he was going to end up being, that he would have ended up in Saudi Arabia? Zero. There's no way. He ended up in Saudi Arabia because he moved to Texas and was working for a geophysics company in Dallas, Texas. And all these Texans were going to Saudi. And so these little itty-bitty things, just like the advice that this high school teacher gives, because even if you believed in something so concrete as a soul, right? Like, oh yeah, you've just been born somewhere else, somebody else, it wouldn't have been this body, it wouldn't have been this personality, it wouldn't have this DNA. So you think about that, and then you take it one step further. And make it even stranger. So let's say your parents did still get together. So it's still your parents. And they made another kid because they didn't have sex that specific time to make you. It was another time. Think about it. Like if a woman is fertile for 30 years and she's fertile 12 times a year, that's 360 eggs she's dropping. So there's a 1 in 360 chance you would have been the one. But then your dad, he had how many billions of sperm? And you are exactly the combination of that egg and that sperm, unless you're a chimera, in which case you might be an egg and 2 sperm. That's a thing. It's really weird. A person with 3 sets of DNA, basically, right? But you think about like what it took to make you be here now in this moment, and you realize this is a really crazy, fragile thing. And the likelihood of me surviving, in my teen years was close to 0. We were blowing stuff up and getting arrested by the police and shooting each other with BB guns. You know, there was a path that we were on, and somehow we made it. Infant mortality rates, disease. What if you had been born 1,000 years ago instead of this moment now? What would that have done for your life expectancy? So I just want to sort of notice the massiveness of this thing. Where you live in a universe that's 13 billion years old. Our star happens to be 4.6 billion years old. So it's about the last third of the universe's existence, assuming Big Bang is right, but even though Hawking tried, he couldn't quite knock Big Bang off the table. And then you think about like, our star had to be a certain age to create the kind of heavy elements that led to the planet that we're on and the components that went into it. And then the wonkiness of the fact that we probably wouldn't have the kind of planet we have if we didn't have this big moon in orbit around us. We think that a planet our size, having a moon that size, might be rare. But the moon has done something really cool for us besides tides, which are critical in the evolution of life on the planet. It may also be tugging on the solid core in the center and causing the solid core in the center to wobble, creating friction, which just makes it so we have this massive magnetosphere, which protects us from radiation. Which then is how I'm going to segue into the biology of what we are, because we shouldn't have this conversation if we don't ground it in biology. So and then in the process, maybe we can have a conversation about why we have male and female and why we have the biology, the physiology that we have, and then use that to segue into culture and how we ended up with the cultures we have. That's my goal, and then we'll see where we go from there. So there are 2 basic forms of reproduction on the planet, asexual and sexual. Asexual, there's also snails, but it's basically like sexual. It's just snails are both male and female, so they copulate with each other and impregnate each other, which seems really efficient. Like, wow. I think it's the same effort, but you get double the pregnancies. But so we'll just set snails aside. They're fun, but I don't think they're really useful in this moment. Asexual, we usually think of with a cell splitting itself in 2. And when it does that, it has to also then take its DNA and unravel it and duplicate it, right? So it takes its DNA, it splits it in half, and then it makes the other half so that when the cell splits, it still has the proper coding. The problem with that, or actually the benefit of that, is that you end up with the possibility of an error in the copying. And that's actually a good thing. You want the error. That's a mutation. And without mutations, there's no evolution. So you want the error. The problem is when you're copying, well, there's no such thing as a perfect copy, right? So you're going to have errors, but you're going to get close. And the errors aren't going to happen very often. So your mutation rate is going to be really, really low. Also, probably the maximum size of your organisms is going to be limited because you really can't split a big organism in half to reproduce. I mean, there are those worms that you can cut them in half and now there's 2, and they'll just regrow the missing pieces, and now you just doubled the number of worms, you didn't kill them. But like something as complicated as us, it's probably not going to work. So there is limit to what you could do with asexual reproduction. Having said that, sexual reproduction is amazing for more than just the fact that it dramatically increases the errors. Because when you're now taking DNA from two sources and merging them together, you're going to have a lot of mistakes, right? One of the things we can do when we take your DNA is we can figure out not only what percentage related you are to another person, but how many generations back, because it's like clockwork. The errors are like clockwork. So you can just see there's this many errors in your coding, this many errors in that coding. Oh, you're 2 generations earlier than the other person, right? You can tell that from DNA. So that means we can evolve a lot faster. The reason you want that is because it allows you to adapt to parasites. It allows you to adapt to a changing environment quickly. In other words, it builds in, right? Because if you have a genetic error, like for example, your genetic error is you're better adapted to cold weather. Well, you might not live because if the pond you're living in isn't cold, that's not a very useful adaptation. But if the climate happens to be changing and the pond is getting colder, now you're the one that's going to pass on your DNA, and your siblings that don't have the error aren't, right? So that's why you want to have sexual reproduction. It's so you can have quicker mutations. There's another reason why it's a serious advantage. It actually acts as a way to allow females to exchange DNA with each other. Because when you think about it, from a strictly biological standpoint, males are completely superfluous. The only actual biological role we serve is we're DNA transmitters. So in effect, what I am is I'm the conduit of DNA from my mom to my wife, right? Because first of all, there's so many of us that you don't need this many males, right? If you had 100 women and 1 man, that's plenty. He's going to be really busy, but you could keep the population of the planet going just fine. But if you flipped it and you had 100 men and 1 woman, that's pretty useless. Just so that we have that in mind. So the primary role for males from a biological standpoint is we're the DNA transmitters. But that can be amazing because in my pond that's getting colder, what if the saline levels are rising? Well, if I have the mutation to adapt to cold, but the female that I mate with has the adaptation to adapt to the higher saline levels, now our offspring will have both mutations. Like what is the likelihood in asexual reproduction that you'll get 2 mutations? Low. But the idea of it happening in sexual reproduction is really high, and we can actually swap the DNA with each other and dramatically improve the likelihood that we'll produce something that will have the genetic material to adapt to that particular environment. Another twist to this is you can do things like apples. So when we talk about sexual reproduction, we probably don't immediately think of trees. So I'm going to bring trees into this. Apples are a lot of fun because apples take this to an extreme. So if you're like me, after you eat a really nice peach, you throw the seed into your backyard because you know there's a probability the seed will turn into a tree. And I have a forest for a backyard, so I'm slowly getting these peach trees popping up all over my backyard. And my children, I'll die way before I get any of these peaches, but my children could conceivably get these peaches. And they'll be delicious. They'll be wonderful. But I know not to do this with apples. If I take an apple seed from an envy apple, by the way, the best apple ever, in case you haven't tried an envy apple. We're going to talk about envy and jealousy too, probably at some point. But I'm talking about the apple, not the emotion, so we're clear. Later, we'll do the emotion too, because it's very important. So if I take an envy apple and I pull the seeds out and I throw them in my backyard and I wait for them to turn into trees and I pluck the apples from the trees, I am not going to be happy. I mean, it's not 100%, it's 99%. So let me tell you a fun story. There's this guy, his name is Johnny Appleseed. So you probably think, like I used to think, he was just a myth. Turns out he was a real dude. He made his living planting, this is going to surprise you, apple trees, hence the name Johnny Appleseed. Now, you go, how much money could you make doing this? And the answer is this. When we were allowing people to homestead, right, the euphemism for slaughter Native Americans and steal their farms, when we were allowing white people to go and steal Native American farms and make them theirs, we were worried that the white people would just turn around and sell that land and pocket the money and walk off. So, to properly homestead a piece of land and get the deed, we made it the law that you had to plant fruit trees. The thinking was you would have put in an investment in something you can't get a return on for maybe 10, 15, 20 years. And so as a result, you would be incentivized to stick around to see your return come. Johnny Appleseed moved with the frontier. He moved his business planting. He was the guy you would hire to plant the apple trees in your land. But it turned out he was a religious fanatic. Now you go, does that matter? Does my arborist's religion really matter? And it turns out with apples, it does matter. Because apples have a really fun adaptation. Every time a seed grows into a tree, it produces an apple completely different from the apple that it came from. And 99% of the time, the apple that it produces is inedible. You're not going to eat it and enjoy it. It's too sour, it's too bitter, it's too mealy, it's too hard, it's not juicy, it's too juicy. Whatever it is, it will be wrong and you will hate that apple. Because that's how apples adapted to deal with parasites. In other words, they've taken this to an extreme where every generation they produce something dramatically different. Like that's their goal. There's a solution to this. So at one point somebody said red delicious apples are delicious, which is bizarre to me because they're the most hideous, disgusting, vile food item ever in the history of food. Like somebody intentionally bred those things. And I can't believe it. I went to my kids' school like last year and they were serving the kids this. I'm like, no. No wonder American children can't read. They're eating red delicious. There's no way this makes sense. Anyway, somebody grafted red delicious buds from a tree that produced red delicious onto a sapling. And now that sapling will grow into an adult tree that produces red delicious. The way envy apples are reproduced is not by planting an envy apple seed. They probably do, but it's not going to produce envy apples unless you graft a bud from an envy apple tree onto this sapling, and then it will turn into an envy apple producing tree. And Johnny Appleseed knew this because when the Kazakhstanis first began cultivating apples, they figured this thing out. And then as the apples spread across Europe from Kazakhstan, the Europeans figured this out. So by the time Johnny Appleseed's out west, he knows all he has to do is take this bud, graft it on there. But he doesn't because he feels like he's interfering with Jesus' will. Jesus wanted that tree to produce inedible apples. Who's he to second guess that? And so the apples go west with Johnny Appleseed, and 20 years later, people are picking, and they're like, dude, what do I do with these apples? And somebody went, cider. And the next thing you know, we have an alcoholic culture completely based on apple cider until the 1870s when a group of Christian fanatic women decided to burn all the apple orchards down. And they went on this mass campaign going from apple orchard to apple orchard, just wiping out the apples. And then Germans went, we got you, and they just made beer. And that's how the United States became a beer drinking country. All because apples mutate quickly. So we do the same thing, we just do it a different way. Our goal isn't to make human beings that have different tastes. Our goal is to make human beings that have different characteristics, different personalities, different ways of thinking. Our goal is to make human beings that connect together in a community as a diverse population that approach the world differently. Because a community is only as strong as its members. So if you have a community with 100 members in it, and there's 100 different personalities, if there's a crisis or a problem that needs to be solved, you have 100 potential solutions. But if you have a community where there's only 2 personalities, now you only have 2 potential solutions. Doesn't matter that there's 100 members. In other words, our adaptation with the mutations is to have all these crazy differences in personality. It's not that some personalities are better than other personalities. It's that every personality has its role potentially in this community. But that's not how we treat this, right? We expect there's going to be a population of people who are entrepreneurs or innovators who go out and they do the really exciting stuff, and then we are going to worship them, and we're going to treat everybody else like human garbage because we've got this hierarchical system. We didn't always have this hierarchical system. So let's take this thing back, or I guess forward. So I've explained why we have sexuality. So what I want to now do is talk about our species specifically and not generically. So I've thrown the personality thing out there, but let's take it down to we were monkeys, then we became apes, and now we're apes, but we're just hairless apes. We're the naked apes. And we are always walking upright as opposed to occasionally walking upright. So we're a little bit different from our ape brothers and sisters, but we're still 98% genetically identical. When aliens come and conquer the planet, they'll be like, bonobos, chimpanzees, gorillas, humans, you all look the same to us, get into the feed vats. You know what I mean? Or they enslave us or whatever, if they're like us. Just, maybe they're not like us and we'll be okay. But if they're like us, we are so in trouble, just for the record. This is not gonna work out well. Or it'll finally bring us together. Anyway, it's fun to dream. A bunch of us will probably just happily work with them and sell the other half out. So, our species is really strange for multiple reasons, one of which is we are herbivores, right? Initially, I mean, I'm a carnivore, there's no two ways about it. What I mean is that primates are herbivores. So we're the carnivorous herbivore. We went into meat eating, and we've got the teeth to prove it. Our back teeth are herbivore teeth, and our front teeth are carnivore teeth. We have both. We're set up to chew plants and grind them down and to rip chunks of meat off of bone. And it's kind of a strange thing because when you think about our evolution, we were eating fruits, jumping from tree to tree, hanging out, eating fruits. By the way, monkeys have figured out alcohol. In case you were wondering, like, when did that happen? At least 20 million years ago. They'll wait till the fruit over-ripens and starts producing alcohol, and then they'll go get the fruit. And for the record, the males will often bring the females the overripe fruit and exchange them for sex. Just thought I'd throw that out there in case you're all like dating and you're wondering, like, is this normal? 20 million years we've been doing something like this. And by the way, the monkeys will get into brawls, they'll beat each other up, they'll fall out of the trees. They're hilarious because they're so much like us. Y'all have gotten drunk and fallen out of trees, right? I'm hoping I'm not the only one here. So, having said that, we are going to evolve the way we do because we go for the big brain. And we do this almost certainly because of the place we're evolving in, which is East Africa. East Africa, the climate kept changing, and it kept changing really rapidly. So in a normal circumstance, when climate's changing slowly, you rely on the mutations to give you the adaptation for, oh, it's desert now, how do I adapt to desert? Oh, it's forest now, how do I adapt to forest? And at some point in our evolution in East Africa, our species came up with the ultimate adaptation, which was not to adapt. Not physically, but culturally. Instead of changing our physiology for the climate, we changed our technology and our culture and the way we behaved for the climate. And what that did was that allowed us, in part because we create these different personalities that see the world in different ways, so we're much more likely to innovate, that put us in a position where, yeah, if in 20,000 years this swamp turns into a desert, it's not a big deal. We'll just change our culture and our technology to operate within this. But to grow the bigger brain, we needed access to calories. Lots of calories, really fast. Because I know this isn't true for the average American, but for a normal human being, this is the big calorie consumer, right? It's our brains. They're a huge drain on our caloric intake. And if I'm eating carrots all day, I'm not gonna have a functioning brain. I need something that's gonna bring me a lot of calories. And there's pretty much nothing that gets you calories faster than meat. So what our species began doing is we began following carnivores, waiting for them to do a kill, and then we would go in like vultures and we would eat the leftover of the carcasses. Because our species, we were the prey. We were not the predator. We were small. We didn't have any serious advantages. We weren't particularly strong. And so what we would do is we would just opportunity eat meat. But as our brains got bigger, our bodies also started to get bigger. We began to actively hunt too at some point. But to do that, we needed a tool because we don't have big claws and we don't have big fangs and we're not especially strong. In other words, we switched to hunting by developing tools. Well, if I'm walking sometimes on my hands, carrying a tool around is pretty hard to do. To walk with a tool all the time, I need to be upright. Also, a fantastic tool is fire. If I can get a hold of fire technology, I can cook my food. If I can cook my food, I can get access to more calories. So we switched to eating meat, and then eventually we switched to eating cooked food, and that gives us the calories. In other words, the smarter we get, the bigger our brain can become because we keep making these advances. And we go bipedal. Once we go bipedal, something goes terribly wrong. Well, we had another problem too. So if we're going for the brain, it means a big head at birth. So all of a sudden, we've got this large thing that has to come out of a relatively small body. And it's gonna be a kind of a violent event. When you think about what most animals do, the head isn't especially big, and so it's not a problem. But then we go bipedal. So now we're walking upright, which means that the hip area's physiology has changed. And the way women are gonna carry that pregnancy and the way they're gonna have to operate within the world pregnant, and then the way they're gonna give birth also now dramatically changes. So one of the ways our species adapted to this is we do the last 3 months outside. Think about it. When a puppy is born, it can walk almost right away. It's maybe not right away, but it's almost right away. When a horse is born, it can walk right away. Right? It's up and it's hanging out with mom, and it's like, whoa. For 3 months, our infants are completely feeble. They're basically a worm with arms and legs. They're going nowhere. And that's how, one of the ways our species compensated is like, okay, I'm gonna get you to the point where I can still get you out because you're still small enough, you can fit, but you're not gonna be anywhere near developed enough. So your parents aren't gonna sleep for 3 months, which means they're gonna have awful, awful judgment, and it's gonna be a miracle you survive. But to compensate for that, Women produce oxytocin while pregnant. Oxytocin gives you that glow and you smile all the time. That's why people are always like, you're glowing to pregnant women, because they are. They have oxytocin, not OxyContin. That's a different thing. I know your minds went there. Oxytocin. And it also makes you forget. It tears your memory up. See how good evolution is? Boy, if she remembers this, there's no way she's ever going to get pregnant again. We need to delete these memories. It's genius. Anyway, so now we have this other problem. Think about how most species indicate that it's time to mate. There's a period of heat, and during the heat, there is a display. But if you're walking upright, how do you do the display? And also, by the way, the display literally meant an increase in size. So, right, it's a display, and then the male sees it and he's like, all right, she's ready, and there's an event. But if you're walking upright, you can't do this. This is not a thing anymore because you won't be able to run, for example. And so what we needed to do was we needed to make it so that we were constantly mating. We couldn't mate periodically. We needed constant mating so that females don't have to have a way to indicate they're ready for mating purposes. To maximize the likelihood of a pregnancy, then, you have to basically get it so there's constant mating, which is why we began to pair up. Which is why it became important in our species to have an equal number of males to females. Because when you think about it, in most species, there's more females than there are males, like lions. Now, one of the reasons is because the lions will go kill male pups when they're born, just to keep the population right. It's ruthless, but it's how it is. Tigers will do the same thing. But with our species, we needed people paired up. And so actually, here's a really weird twist, one-on-one pairing evolved. We didn't just evolve that culturally, it came out of biological necessity to maximize the ability of people to produce a family. It didn't mean you had to be paired with that person permanently, it just meant at any given time you wanted one male, one female pairing for reproduction purposes. So, we've got our species, it's eating meat, it's cooking with fire, it's got tools. We've figured out how to get around the biology of becoming bipedal. We're slow now, right? We don't run fast. We're trying to be efficient because we need to get the big brain. We're getting the big brain. We're developing better and better tools. And then at some point, we become basically what we are. We become Homo sapiens sapiens. We think we hit Homo sapiens sapiens about 450,000 years ago. So we've been around for almost 500,000 years. When you think about that, it's almost strange. So if you had done the research up to about 2017, 2018, we were thinking we were 200,000 years old. In 2000, I think it was 18, we discovered a 375,000-year-old Homo sapiens sapiens skull in Morocco. So when they did the math, they were like, oh, I guess we're not 200,000 years old, and they rolled it back to about 450 is the guess. So we're about 450,000 years old, but we've only been doing agriculture for 12,000 years. So for 438,000 years, we were content gathering and hunting, and operating and gathering and hunting bands. And so to me at least, there's a really big question here. So we did agriculture 12,000 years ago. We did government 6,500 years ago. We do warfare slightly after that. We do writing 5,400 years ago. You know, like, what were we doing that first 445,000 years? Why weren't we doing these breakthroughs earlier? What happened? Because when I say Homo sapiens sapiens, I mean if they walked through and walked up right now, they would be indistinguishable from us. We would not look at them and go, dude, you look funny. I don't mean Neanderthals with the big eyebrow ridges, but by the way, that's Homo sapiens Neanderthals. In other words, they're not only totally genetically related to us in every way, shape, and form, we bred with them. 23andMe will tell you what percentage Neanderthal you are, because we figured out what the Neanderthal DNA is. Isn't that cool? I don't remember what I was. I think like 6% or something like that. And for the record, we now think that a bunch of our advancements came from breeding with Neanderthal. We have always looked down on Neanderthal. They were so primitive and backwards. We now actually think they had some advantages that we, by breeding into them, then adopted and got into our DNA pool. So that they're not as primitive as you think. I know it's cool, you want them to be, but what they were cold climate Homo sapiens. They had to eat 3,000 calories a day, but they didn't have to wear a coat. And we could eat 1,500 calories a day and had to wear a coat. That's the main difference. But they were bigger than us. If a Neanderthal male did come in here, you would tell them apart because they had the eyebrow ridges, but also their muscle structure would have been bigger, much stronger, and they had beaten us up pretty badly, except that they were basically pacifists, so they wouldn't have beaten us up. The way they hunted, just for the record, I know it's really off topic, but it's so bizarre. They would climb trees, and then they would have other Neanderthals. They would chase the animals underneath the tree, and then they would jump down on their back, and they would strangle them to death. And the way we know this is they have rodeo compression fractures on their backs from like bronco riders and bull riders. They have the same compression fractures. So they were strangling these animals to death instead of stabbing them to death with a spear. And we're watching this going, just use a spear. And then we finished them off. All right, so there's our first genocide. I mean, it wasn't thorough. I just got through telling you I'm 6% Neanderthal. It's not like they didn't technically go extinct when you think about it, right? It's just they got bred into us as we finished them off. We narrowed them down to France, and then we outcompeted them, dropped them down to France, and finished them off. All right, so having said all this, we're weird because we're the apex predator. There's no two ways about it. We've done weird studies where we'll put a human voice in the forest and then run it, and then have a camera set up so every time an animal passes by, the camera turns on and films the animal, sees what it does when it hears the human voice. And our voice naturally scares animals. They would do other animal voices so that you'd have a control group, and our voice scares wild animals more than any other sound made on the planet. So they have evolved to be scared of us because we're death and destruction and carnage, right? We're so horrific, we're gonna wipe ourselves out. We're like that bad. So we're the apex predator, but when you think about it, we don't behave like an apex predator. An apex predator has dignity and pride. Think of lions and tigers. Think of bears. Think of wolves. There's a confidence that apex predators usually have. Killer whales. There's a confidence they carry with them that we just don't have. We're a skittish, scared animal. We're always looking over our shoulder. In social circumstances, we're always like, oh, how's my hair? How do I feel? Do people like me? And the reason is because we've got the psychology of prey. We became a predator, but that's not we're this scared little ape running around on the veld hoping that we don't get eaten by a cougar. And somehow we have nukes now. And so we've evolved down a strange path because we're the unlikely apex predator that made it to the top. Bears are crazy smart. If it wasn't for us, they might be on a path to become the next sentient species. Killer whales, of course, I don't know how they're gonna get the thumb, but if they ever did, right, they could have been on that path to become the next sentient species. Elephants kind of have a thumb with that trunk, and they are clearly super sentient. It turns out there's a bunch of sentient animals. We pretend we're the only ones, but it's not true. And they have language. Elephants actually have a tone that they use to communicate with each other that's deep. We can't hear it, but we can make devices that can hear it. And it's actually really sophisticated. And we all know about whales talking to each other. Bees have communication, right? I mean, there are insects that are capable of this. But in our arrogance, we just dismiss everybody else, and we're like, we're the only one. Our species, another piece about our species that's really strange, is we're one of 3 species that have menopause. And when you think about it, that's really amazing, because I just got through showing you the math, right? If I have 100 women and 1 man, I could conceivably have 100 pregnancies after, I don't know, at least 3 months, 4 months. But if I have, so that's the power of women. They can produce life. It's an unbelievable power. It's the most amazing power imaginable. I was there at the birth of both my sons. I do not comprehend it at all. It is still alien to me as I saw them emerging into the world. I will never, ever be able to understand that. One of them's 13 now, and he's got a mustache, and he has acne, and he sounds like me, but he mumbles. So he has my voice, but he mumbles. So that's how we can tell them apart in the house. Is that me? Oh no, that's my son, because I don't mumble, and I don't understand where he came from. Like, I've watched him become a 13-year-old. I've been there every step of the way. None of this makes sense to me. It's beyond comprehension. So having said that, when you think about it, if a woman lives to 77, I think that's life expectancy right now in the United States, and she isn't fertile till she's 13, and then she stops being fertile around 43, so she's got 30 years of fertility. That means 47 years she wasn't capable of making offspring. So if a woman's power is her ability to give birth, then why have menopause and turn women off and give them that extra quarter of a century afterwards? But then here's the next twist. Males are fertile until the day they die. Now, obviously, they're not fertile until they're probably, 15? But they're fertile until the day they die, although obviously sperm count is probably coming down. And mutated semen at age 120 is probably not what you want to produce offspring with. So just for the record, right? But technically, a male could conceivably conceive until his death at 70, because women have about a 10% longer life expectancy. So not only have we evolved menopause, but we've evolved women to live longer. Which then begs the question, what are the other 2 animals? Does anybody know, by the way? Elephants. And technically, I think what elephants have is not menopause, but it's like that. The females do go off production. And killer whales. So basically, the 3 big brain animals on the planet, the females go off reproduction. They go offline, and the last quarter of their life, they're grandmas. We've evolved grandmas. Now, there's no reason on Earth to evolve grandmas unless females provide something that transcends the ability to create life. And when you think about it, what could be more powerful than creating life? That you would take women offline for the last part of their life, the last quarter century, for a human lifespan. Isn't this incredible? We know the answer, by the way. It's not a mystery. But I want you to think about it for a second, because what could possibly be more powerful than creating life? And then you have to ask the other question, and whatever it is, nature is like, yeah, men don't need to live as long. We'll give them 90% the life expectancy. Isn't that crazy? Also, just for the record, men do start to produce oxytocin also right around the time they turn 55-ish. Obviously, it varies. And it, of course, mellows you out. So it basically counteracts your testosterone. And so what happens is we've also evolved grandpas, right? We've done both. And I don't know how we figured it out, but I know what happened with the killer whale research. So I'm going to invoke killer whales. And by the way, F you, SeaWorld, I hate you. Okay, I got that out of my system. SeaWorld, the liars that you are, SeaWorld would tell the people who would come visit SeaWorld that killer whales would live 25 to 35 years while in captivity, which is much longer than in the wild. In the wild, male killer whales live to 60. So SeaWorld was literally cutting their life expectancy in half. SeaWorld was literally murdering these sentient, brilliant animals. The females lived to 80. There's one that lived to 105. They have the same life expectancy we have, and the females have an even more exaggerated life expectancy, right? We're talking 70 to 77 for our species, 60 to 80 for them. And they have menopause, so that last half of that female's life, she's not reproducing. Isn't that incredible? Here's the answer. You ready? I've given you long enough to think about it. Education. Our species, killer whales and elephants, rely on information to survive. And the way you can pass on that is you have to have educators. What happens by the time you're 45? Well, you've experienced a lot of the world. You have a lot of information. You have a lot of wisdom. Childbirth is dangerous. There's a high probability you will die every time you give birth. If I can take you offline, I protect that wisdom and knowledge and then give you the opportunity now to pass it on to your grandchildren. And so we've created grandmothers specifically to give the opportunity to pass it on to the grandchildren. But think about what I'm then saying, but not grandfathers so much. I mean, we did. That's why we produce oxytocin. Males begin to produce oxytocin so that it basically counteracts some of their testosterone, so they stop competing with 20-year-old males for mates, because that's what the testosterone's doing. I need to compete for a mate. Well, when you're 55 and you're fighting that 20-year-old, he's gonna kill you. And so to keep you from getting killed, the oxytocin is supposed to keep you around for 15 years of wisdom. But menopause keeps her around for 25 years of wisdom. So her wisdom is clearly, according to evolution, significantly more valuable than my wisdom. So just think about the implication of what I'm saying here. One of the reasons we know that it probably happened with our species, beyond the fact that obviously grandmas are useful, is because of the way our species has evolved interaction between people. All the experiments on facial expressions, they crack me up. So when people are exposed to facial expressions, women have like a 90% accuracy rate on being able to read a facial expression. Oh, that person's mad. Oh, that person's happy. Oh, that person's sad. Men can't do it. Like we're social morons. We'll look, I think she just wants to have sex with me. No, she's angry. Okay, next picture. Oh, I think she still wants to have sex. No, she's laughing at a joke. And this is what our species has evolved for us. Okay, next picture. Can I do the sex answer? No. She's sad. She's weeping. From joy? No, she's just really upset. Probably because she had to deal with you earlier in the day. And she hates your guts now. And so now there's this huge question, what went wrong there? Because we're obviously a social species. So why isn't it that males have the full breadth? And obviously there are some males who are better at this than others. Because as I said from the beginning, the whole idea was that we would have really diverse personalities. But as a whole, males just don't do well on this scale. And obviously there are women who don't do well on this scale also, just so we're clear. We're doing generalizations, but based on a bell curve. And that middle zone, the two middle zones are hilarious. So how did this happen? Why did this happen? So to do this, I want to invoke a little bit of Hegel here. And there may be, so Hegel says, when you have a slave-master relationship, the slave understands the world better than the master. So there may be a power position in here. I'm actually going to blow this idea up in a second, but I need to introduce it first. There may be a power problem in that it becomes more important for a female to be able to read male facial expressions than it is for a male to be able to read female facial expressions because of the physical difference. But then that asks the question, why did we evolve the physical difference? Right? There are frog species where the females are twice the size of the males. But when you look at bears, the males are bigger. When you look at lions, the males are bigger. When you look at tigers, the males are bigger. When you look at us, the males are bigger. All right? I'm almost 90 pounds. I'm 90 pounds bigger than my wife. Like, it's not a small difference. Actually, she upset me about 6 weeks ago. She turned to me and she said, "You could just beat me up." And I'm like, God, why are we having this ugly-ass conversation? Couldn't we? You know what? I think the bluebonnets are going to bloom early this year. Let's have that conversation. But it was like this jarring moment of, I mean, I guess it's true. It's a good thing, I guess, I don't think about it on a regular basis. But our species has done this. And so there's this question, why? And here, it's killer whales. The males are these big, bulky, and the females are really agile, and they can swim circles around the males, which is actually a serious disadvantage in SeaWorld. You can tell I hate SeaWorld. Death to SeaWorld. For the record, in case you were wondering, the part of the brain that does the emotion center in killer whales is like 5 times larger than ours. Which means that when they feel sadness, it's literally 5 times more intense than we do. And think about it when you felt sadness. When they feel joy, it's 5 times more intense than when we feel joy. That's a sentient being that we're tormenting and torturing. It's unconscionable. Cows, we should just put cows in water and make them swim with people. Or chickens or something. Squid, I hate squid. They eat their young. Anything that eats their young meat is detestable. Death to Squid by Calamari. You know what I mean? Octopus, don't eat octopus, that's wrong. Never eat something smarter than the average person. It's bad. So, I told you I was going to blow this idea up, so let me do it. So, here's the really interesting thing. When we look at gathering and hunting bands on the planet, for example, I'm going to invoke the Mundurucú Sioux. When we look at the Mundurucú Sioux, here's what their arrangement is. I can't help but smile. Mundurucú Sioux, they're a South American, Native American tribe. So they build villages with the center being a treed area, like a courtyard but with trees, and they string hammocks from it. And that's where the males live. And then they ring that with huts. And that's where the women live. And each woman is assigned a hut. So each woman has her own specific hut. And each woman, when she's ready, can go into the square, the plaza, and select a mate. And she has full authority for how long the mate can live in the hut. So if she likes him, they could live together forever. If she doesn't like him, after 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 minutes, she can kick him out and he has to go live in the hammocks with the other reject males. And then, right? And that's their arrangement. Which means, when you think about it, all the power is with the women, because the men are sitting there in the hammock when it starts raining, thinking, how do I have to do to get into that hut? Because even if you don't want the relationship and the sex, you at least want to get out of the rain. You know what I'm saying? And so if it really was a matter of physical prowess, and that the men would just beat you up and take it, then why don't the Mundurucú Sioux men just beat up the women and take it? Isn't that interesting? And when we look at gathering and hunting band after gathering and hunting band, not only do the women express extraordinary equality, there are frequently systems in place where the women clearly have more power than the males. Native American nations in North America now, if you look at them, most of them, actually I don't know if it's most. I don't know, I'm not enough of an expert to stick to my guns on most. I think it's most, let's do that. They're at least matrilineal, if not matrilocal. So let me do the Apache as an example. So when two people get married amongst the Apache, the man goes to the wife's people. In other words, they're matrilocal. So the man has to move to her people. And then they're matrilineal. Her family is the family that the kid is going to identify with. It's to the point when if I met my father's family, I would call them by their first name and I would treat them like equals. But when I meet my mother's family, I have to say Mr. and Miss, and I have to treat them with respect. I can't treat them as equals. When an Apache man wants a divorce, he goes on a hunt and just never comes back. When an Apache woman wants a divorce, she takes his stuff and sticks it outside. So when he comes home, he sees the stuff outside. They don't even have a conversation. He just picks the stuff up off and goes away. That's power, which then makes you ask the question, if it really was about physical prowess, then why isn't it reflected in these older cultures, these cultures that are diverse and they're all over the place? I'm talking about gathering and hunting bands in Africa too, not just North and South America. And by the way, I'm also talking about early agriculture societies. So early agriculture societies like the Pueblos in New Mexico, that when the Spanish made contact with them, they were also this way, matrilocal and matrilineal. So you would go move to the wife's family, and you would now become a member of the wife's family. In our culture, of course, nobody lives with their families anymore. Let me rephrase that. Before 2008, we had completely blown up the families, but since the economy has never really fully recovered from that depression we experienced in 2008, we now have these multi-generation homes again, like we used to have 200 years ago. Anyway, it's kind of fun. Who doesn't want to hang out with their, 120 years ago, who doesn't want to hang out with their grandparents? But for the most part, most of us have done everything we can to jettison our parents and our grandparents and live on our own. But we do expect the woman to completely erase her identity by changing her name. When you think about it, what's more powerful than renaming a person? So Iran right now is having a revolution because they're trying to jettison the mandatory hijab. But I gotta tell you, I think losing your name is more of an identity-crushing event in a person's life than having to wear something on your head. Like, one of you currently has a hat on, and I'm betting $100 they don't feel like their identity was crushed by wearing a hat. You know what I'm saying? Just throwing that out there. So we're the opposite of that, right? We're clearly patrilineal, in the sense that we make the mother lose her identity. Not only do we give the children the identity of the man, as if somehow she had become part of that family. She's not. Once she's divorced, right, nobody in the family will ever talk to her again. There's no relationship whatsoever. It's not like she's actually part of the family. But there's an expectation that she will somehow have loyalty to this new family. It's bizarre to me. So how did this happen? It looks like the answer is warfare. At some point, we began to do agriculture. That point was about 11,700 years ago on the banks of the Euphrates River. We began to farm. It took the population living in Mesopotamia about 6,000 years to go from 0% reliant on farming to about 60% reliant on farming. In other words, every 1,000 years they added 10% more farming to their food intake. When you think about it, that's really incredible because it means that farming wasn't a wonderful invention at all. It was something that people reluctantly and slowly adopted. Because if it was so amazing, once they invented it, they would have just switched all their caloric requirements over to agriculture, and they didn't. And the reason is because agriculture requires a lot of energy. It's intensive work. And if something goes wrong with your farm, you're screwed. But if you're gathering and hunting and something goes wrong with the place that you're gathering and hunting in, you just move to another place and find a different food source. So agriculture ties you to a piece of land. You have to plant, you have to cultivate, you have to chase Bambi and Thumper off because they'll eat your crops. And then what happens if your neighbors have a food problem? You're chasing your neighbors away too because you need to feed your family. And then, of course, at some point, what happens when your neighbors are formed into a community and they come and they raid your property and you can't defend yourself, so now you form a community, and then before you know it, your community is fighting that community with clubs. And then somebody gets a genius idea to take the scythes that you were using to cut the wheat, to cut them, and you've just invented the sword. And the next thing you know, we have warfare. Well, warfare is obviously going to advantage the physical over, the social. So in other words, my ability as a man to be able to wield a weapon for longer and to be able to strike harder gives me a serious advantage over a woman wielding a weapon. But it's still not right. And here's why. It also turns out that my ability to think in battle is a serious advantage. A smart warrior, it can overwhelm a strong warrior. Combat isn't just physical prowess. If it was, we'd have been eaten by the tigers. They're way stronger than us. We outsmarted the tigers. And a soldier could do that on the battlefield. And historically, women have been warriors. And it's not like it was occasionally. There were whole divisions. All right, so one of my favorite stories ever. You know the Amazons? The story of the Amazons? The myth of the Amazons? It wasn't a myth, it actually happened. There were multiple ancient societies that fielded women in battle. The Armenians, for example, had an all-woman archer division. Isn't that cool? The Persians had the door open. So they didn't have all-women units, although at one point they had an all-woman Armenian division in their ranks because when they conquered Armenia, they were like, you want to just join us? And the women were like, sure. But the ethnic Persian army, they just simply allowed women to become warriors. They didn't make women divisions. So if a woman was inclined to, she could just try out for the division. And if she could succeed in passing the test, she could be a member. So there was a unit of soldiers that we're pretty sure were Scythians. It's hard to know because the Greeks lied all the time, especially people like Herodotus. He was like SeaWorld. Everything out of his mouth was vile. It was just wrong. Herodotus and other Greeks tended to lie a lot, so we're missing information. And then when Alexander the Great captured Takhta Jamshid, Persepolis, the Persian capital, he set it on fire. So we lost all the Persian records because he's a jerk. Anyway, we think what happened was there was a Scythian unit of all women warriors that had been part of a mercenary army, and one day something went wrong, something went sideways, and this all-unit woman warrior force went rogue, and they just started going down the Aegean Sea, burning temple after temple, sacking city after city, just tearing up the Greek city-states along the Aegean. And because we don't have enough information, we're not sure why, but we have the archaeology to prove it. We've got the burnt temples, even where they rebuilt the temple, You can dig down into the original foundation and you can see the original temple that was burned, and then we have all their accounts of it. So we have their historical records. And so there was this rampage of women, and of course it freaked the Greeks out, and they made up the story about this horrible civilization of women warriors who would cut off one breast so they could fire arrows. By the way, you don't have to do that. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but you don't have to actually chop off a breast to fire an arrow from a bow. But that's where the Greek mind went. And they villainized them, and they talked about how evil and horrible they were, and then made artwork with them, where they were eventually defeated. There's no evidence they were defeated. They apparently just got bored and marched off and stopped doing the rampage. I'm betting you they had a reason to do it, and I'm betting you the reason was totally logical, and I'm betting they were the good guys, but we'll never know. So there's that. So in other words, that war doesn't quite explain it, because one more women warrior thing. Vikings. So full disclosure, I'm a quarter Swedish, so I'm inclined to like everything the Vikings did. Just so we're clear, I know I'm biased. I just want to be open with my bias so that you know when I talk about the Vikings and the cruelty that they enacted on the world, I think it was a good thing. For years, when we would dig up these Viking kings, we put them in museums or we'd store them somewhere and we'd pull out their relics and put their relics in museums, we were like, wow, look at these glorious kings, one after the other. Buried with ships, buried with swords. They would sometimes sacrifice horses and bury a horse with them so that they could have a horse in the afterlife. In the 1970s, the year in my head is 79, but who knows? Don't quote me on that. There was a woman archaeologist who did something bizarre. She stuck her finger into the back of the skulls of all these Viking kings. So if you put your finger back there, there is a knob if you're a male, there's no knob if you're female. We can tell the gender of every single skeleton with a 3-second examination. It's just right there. I can feel my little, it's like a little ball at the back of a male skull, and it's missing on a female skull. And she put her finger back there. And it turned out a bunch of these Viking kings were queens. She's like, whoa, there's no little ball. What's this? And so we buried the research. We just hid it. And then about 15 years ago, less than that I think, 12 years ago, somebody went and found this article, and they were like, wait a minute. And so they went back and they figured out how many of these Viking kings were queens, and they were warriors. They weren't just Viking queens that were buried with lots of relics. They were Viking queens that were buried with their shields and their swords that had nick marks in them and shields that had battle marks in them, because they were soldiers, they were warriors. Isn't that fascinating? They were melee combatants, not just archers. Isabella, the Queen of Spain, led her armies into battle at the front, killing soldiers with her own weapon. So, then what happened? Here's what I think happened. It's just a hypothesis. It's probably totally wrong, but it's the best I've got. Remember the math on this? 1 man, 100 women? So let's say we have a war, and it's between a completely sexist, patriarchal society that just crushes and grinds women into slavery, and then a society where women are completely equal. We go to war. There are women warriors in the society that's completely equal, which means they potentially outnumber the other society, right? Because they can field potentially twice as many men. People. Twice as many warriors. But what happens when those women die in battle? Then the next generation is dramatically smaller. In other words, what warfare does is it gives the patriarchal societies the advantage of keeping their ability to produce the next generation of warriors maxed out because it's keeping its women out of the battlefield. And so over time, warfare accidentally selects out the patriarchal societies and gives them preference over the societies that are egalitarian. So probably the most egalitarian civilization we've ever had was ancient Egypt. The 5th pharaoh ever. So Egypt had just unified. So Narmer is the first pharaoh. He's the founder of the first dynasty. Egypt had 32 dynasties before the Romans finally conquered Egypt in 31 BC. The 5th pharaoh was a woman named Mernith. I mean, just think about that for a second. We've had 46 men. Well, 45 men, but we count Grover Cleveland twice, so we're on President 46. They were at 5 when they got to a woman. Probably somewhere around 10% of Egyptian pharaoh were women. It's not 50%, but still 10%. That's shocking. That's amazing. Women had ownership over their sexuality in ancient Egypt. So you need contrast. Rome. In Rome, a father owned his daughter's sexuality until he got her married off, usually, by the way, around age 13-ish. And then the moment she's married, her husband now owns her sexuality. And I am using the word own on purpose. So in other words, in Rome, if a man has sex with his daughter and he didn't get the permission of the dad can charge him a financial penalty because he's used his property without permission. It's theft. Whereas in Egypt, a woman owned her sexuality her entire life. So, for example, if in ancient Egypt a woman went outside of the marriage for sex, tough, too bad. You should have done a better job making her happy. Maybe you should just let go of jealousy. Jealousy sucks. Ancient Egypt, the MDs were overwhelmingly women. Ancient Egypt set up the first ever school. It was a medical school, about 5,000 years ago, by the way. And director after director after director of that medical school were women. Women merchants. Women had political posts. When you look at ancient Egyptian civilization, all the way through, women had enormous authority. When I said 10% were pharaoh, that misses the point when they had a situation where the queen was clearly the ruler. So Amenhotep III, so if you ever go to Cairo, which by the way, I'm just going to tell you right now, if you don't go to Egypt, you've really made a mistake in your life. Egypt is, it's beyond splendid. I can't tell you how crazy amazing it is. I actually don't know what they're doing anymore because they've changed the museum system. So I'm probably giving you old information. But the Cairo Museum, this is how it used to be. By the way, the Cairo Museum is gigantic, and it's 2 stories, and it's filled with stuff, and it's like this much of what Egypt had. Like you're walking around and you're looking at like one tiny fraction of a percent. It's bizarre. Egypt is where you go to be humbled and crushed. Egypt is where you go to get perspective. I'm thinking of a story, but I'm not going to tell it. I want to tell it, but it's just... Okay, I was with a person. I won't go into details. I'll leave it completely vague. The person, when they see this video, will be like, that was me. I went to Iran, and I was with this person. And this person was very proud of all the stuff they were showing me in Iran. And I was loving it. I couldn't believe it. It was amazing. And then we went to Egypt. And the person looked at me and went, because I had been to Egypt multiple times, and she said, oh my God, the stuff you saw in Iran was a joke to you, wasn't it? Like, this doesn't even compare. And I go, dude, I've shown you this much of Egypt. So, okay, Old Cairo Museum in Medan Tahrir. If you walked in the front door, and I don't know what they've done now because they've changed things around, but when you walked in the front door, if you looked straight ahead, actually right in front of you is a table with a stela on it. That stela is an armor stela that he issued when he unified Egypt. So it's the stela announcing the birth of Egypt 5,100 years ago. So don't miss the stela. But when you look past it, there's this giant statue. It's huge. It's a man and a woman sitting next to each other. And the man is Amenhotep III, and the woman is Queen T. Egyptians focused on every tiny little detail. They didn't miss details. Every detail mattered. So when they would make a statue, you can see the shape of the muscles. Like they're carefully designing every detail in that statue. And when you look at the statue, you'll notice something right away. So Queen T is shorter than Amenhotep, so her head is slightly lower than his head. But she's wearing the ancient Egyptian perfume thing. So the ancient Egyptians just figured out if you take the perfume you like and you mix it into animal fat, as it heats up, it'll release the scent. And so they would put like a tub of animal fat on their head. And so the heat from the head would create the scent. So Queen T has this perfume thing on the top of her head. Well, the perfume thing shoots up way over the top of Amenhotep III's head. So even though her head is slightly lower than his, because that's realistic because she was shorter than him, she's wearing this perfume tub that goes over his, which was the ancient Egyptian way of signaling she was the real ruler. Right? And so that was possible in that society. One of the reasons why Elizabeth I never married was because she knew the instant she did, the king would take over. There was no option for her as queen to rule, except to just be single and never marry. Whereas in ancient Egypt, queens ruled regularly. So it's 10% women pharaoh, but there was probably another 15% queens were ruling. So, by contrast, we have Rome. Not only was sexuality totally owned by males, but women were not allowed to have a public life. Actually, ancient Athens is even better. I'm going to do Athens because usually we think of Athens and its democracy and we get so excited. In Athens, women could not go into public except if they were prostitutes. And by the way, they had 3 tiers of prostitute, and one of those tiers was pornoi, and that's where we get the word pornography from. In case you're ever wondering, is pornography prostitution? The Greeks thought so. Just so we're clear, But in Texas, pornography is not illegal, but prostitution is, so just make sure you bring a camera. Just so we're clear, in case you were looking for loopholes there. No, y'all don't seem that excited. It's your phone, just set up your phone. Make sure it's recording though. These little subtle, anyway, I feel like somebody didn't think these things through. I don't know. Prostitutes could be in public. Women who weren't prostitutes, priestesses. There was room for priestesses, they could also be in public. Women who weren't prostitutes or priestesses could only be in public if they were beggars, workers, like low-level workers, like garbage collector level, or on special occasions, like religious occasions, to collect the water, because somebody had to get the water, and that was a woman's job. So the women would go to the well, so they would time it so that they would go to the well at the same time, which would then mean there was too many people there to collect the water, so it would cause a log jam, which would mean they were stuck, and then they could talk. And by the way, this is how I'm going to segue into another piece of this, which is maybe explains the facial feature thing a little bit, and it's gossiping. Because we think of gossiping as this kind of nasty thing that people do, but it turns out gossiping is essential. It's beyond essential. It's probably why we evolved language. Because think about it, you're in a group with 20 people, and one of the 20 people never seems to know what's going on, they're always daydreaming, and you're like in a dangerous situation, in a crisis mode. It's good to gossip because you can be like, oh my God, that guy, he's gonna get us killed. And if you can't communicate that to the other people in the group, right, that guy becomes a problem for you. But on a different occasion, his inability to pay attention might be exactly what you need, and that's how you're going to get through that crisis. But you need to be able to utilize that. So what we think happened was our species began gossiping, and that's what caused us to create language, and that's the social glue that stuck us together, but also made it so we could efficiently work together. Anyway, so the women are around the water well, gossiping, but they had to cover their hair and their face. So they could go in public as long as they wore magab. So for those of you who don't know what that term means, it's the complete covering like that you would expect to see a Muslim woman in maybe Saudi Arabia wearing, where you only see her eyes. That's what the ancient Athenians required their women to do if they went into public. Women were so erased in public, it was taboo to say a woman's name. So you would say my wife, or you would say the mother of, or the wife of. You had to use a mechanism to identify that person if you wanted to gossip about her, because men gossip too, right? But you just couldn't say her name, because invoking her name brought her into public, and that was wrong. She was a private being. And then, of course, Romans and Greeks alike would build 2 living rooms. There was a living room for the women, the family, and then there was a living room for guests. And if a guest ever went into the family living room, it was considered trespassing, because now he could look at the women. And that was taboo. And of course, the Romans and the Greeks were amazing warriors. And Alexander the Great will conquer Egypt, but then he loses it to the Ptolemies. Well, he dies is what happens, and the Ptolemies take over. And then the Romans take that over in 31 BC when they defeat the last pharaoh of Egypt, Cleopatra the 7th. Did you know she was Cleopatra the 7th? Isn't that cool? She had 5 ancestors out to 132nd. So what would that be? Great-grandparents? Wait. So your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents. So great-great-great-grandparents, she had 5. She only had 5 great-great, because they kept inbreeding. Like at one point she had her grandmother's husband was her grandmother's uncle. Like it was like that. It's really gross. The Romans conquer Egypt, they have a problem. The Egyptian women don't want to submit to Roman rule. And so the Egyptian women had to come up with mechanisms to get around it. Because in Rome, only men could sign contracts. But there are all these Egyptian businesswomen, and they have all these businesses. And so what the Egyptian women did was they adapted by doing things like going and buying a slave, and then they bring the slave to the contract signing and have the slave sign the contract. And then they would just do business that way. But it required a lot of pushback and finagling and workaround. So now, I've established where we became patriarchal, right? The rise of Rome, the rise of Greek civilization. The 3 Abrahamic religions have very strong patriarchal tendencies. Now, having said that, I want to take it one step further. Let's say Well, actually, you know what? Let me do one more patriarchal thing. Let's invoke Plato, because I want to just make sure we're clear about what we're talking about here. So Plato does a play called the Symposium. And in the Symposium, the conversation is about love. So if you read Plato's plays, there's always a thing. Like the Laches is about courage. The Republic is about justice. There's always a thing being described. And Plato's brilliant. There's no two ways about it. I'm definitely very Platonistic. Like I am definitely influenced by Plato. His concept of justice, I think, is spot on. I'm on board. I say let's do it. We won't. But by the way, that's what colleges are for. They were supposed to be the way to express Plato's sense of justice. And the German primary and secondary school system was an attempt to create Plato's justice. So it's not like we haven't tried. So 7 men sit around to discuss love. So you already know you're in trouble, because we're missing something in this conversation. I'm not going to go into the details because we just don't. Should I do Aristophanes' tale? Anyway, okay, I'll do Aristophanes because he's so fun. Aristophanes, of course, was the playwright who wrote things like Lysistrata and the clouds and the birds. He loved to do comedy. And whenever he had, by the way, Socrates in one of his plays, because he would make a Socrates character, he would mock him. Just ruthless, contemptuous mockery. Like Aristophanes clearly did not think highly of Socrates. Or he did, and this was his way of flattering him. We'll never know. But so Aristophanes is being included in a play by Plato. And here's what he says happened was, originally all humans had 2 heads, 4 arms, and 4 legs. And the way they traveled was they would go hand to hand like this, and then the hands behind would come down, and then the feet, and then the feet, and then the hands, and the hands, and the feet, and they would just roll everywhere. And they were happy as happy could be because they were never alone, because whenever they wanted conversation and a friend wasn't around, they had the other head to talk to. And Zeus had made a rule, and the rule was that nobody goes to Mount Olympus. As long as nobody goes to Mount Olympus, everybody's okay. And of course, we're humans, so we roll up Mount Olympus. And Zeus gets mad at us. He draws out a big sword, and he cuts all of us in half. And then, because our heads are facing the wrong way, he grabs our heads and turns us. By the way, I went to chiropractor earlier today, so I had that experience. And he turns our heads 180 degrees, so we're facing the right way. And that's why there's love. It's because we're desperately trying to find our missing other half. And then he said, and so some people were male and female, and some people were female and female, and some people were male and male. And that's why we have lesbian and gay love. And that was Aristophanes' explanation. It's very cute. I like it. Anyway, I don't want to overcomplicate it because they actually talk about a bunch of different forms of love. So I'm just going to invoke 3 of the loves that they talked about because there's no need to make it too complicated. So one of the forms of love is what we would call agape. They did not use the word agape. I need this. They actually said there was the love from old Aphrodite and the love from new Aphrodite. They said there is 2 Aphrodites, very confusing. They were born in different ways. Why were there 2 Aphrodites? Anyway, the love from old Aphrodite was what we would call agape. So I'm just going to use agape. And then there was philos and eros. Those are the 3 loves I want to deal with. Agape was pure love. Love that you unconditionally give something or somebody. So for example, the agape that maybe a father has to their child, right? No matter what happens, no matter what the child does, it doesn't matter. It's unconditional love. There's no end to it. And then there's philos. It's a love of a thing for the essence of the thing. So for example, you love gold because it's yellow and shiny and it doesn't corrode. If you bought a piece of gold jewelry and it corroded, you would no longer love it because it wasn't gold. It's what it would turn out to be. So, you love somebody because they're funny. The minute they stop being funny, you don't love them anymore. That's what philos is. By the way, philosophia. Sophia is wisdom. Philos, love of wisdom, philosophy. Isn't that fun? Isn't that cool? Philanthropy, love of humans, well, love of men. So that's kind of sad. I only love half the species. Not even half, 49%. It's kind of lame. Obviously, we meant men to be everybody, but that's still wrong. So then the last one is eros, which is erotic love. And of course, eros is Cupid, right? So what happened was Aphrodite, so in this case, the young Aphrodite, has sex with Ares, the god of war. And their child is Eros, who shoots you with an arrow because his dad was the god of war and his mom was the god of love, and then you fall in love. Huh? Isn't that fun? Now I've explained Valentine's Day to you. Here's what they determined. The 7 men sitting around. They went, women are incapable of agape. They can only do eros and philos. Only men can do agape. Were they looking at the same species? Did they miss something? Have you never seen a mother with her child? That's at least agape. Well, what else is agape than that? That's pure love. Like, I get jealous of my wife sometimes. Like, wow, the heck is that? She has a connection that I can't ever have because those 2 boys are literally a part of her body that are walking around. I can't even comprehend that. I was there. I saw the younger one pee on the nurse. First thing he did. She went, whoa! It's like, yeah, I know you're going to be trouble. And so what they concluded was the best form of love was gay love. Because that way both partners could share eros, philos, and agape. That failing, if you're not into that, I guess you can do heterosexual love, because at least one of the partners is giving the other partner agape. And then, of course, the most inferior form of love is lesbian love, because no agape is possible. Like, what the? I would have thought it was the other way around. I mean, you read Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and you think, surely it's the other way around, right? Because let's invoke Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We're here. We're having fun. Jean-Jacques Rousseau says that the reason we have civil society was because men are deadbeats. He said what happened was men would have sex. As soon as they saw the woman was pregnant, they just take off. Social contract, right? Men are born free everywhere. Men are in chains. And he asks himself the question, why? And the answer is because women went, I'm sick of raising these kids by myself. We're refusing to have sex with any men until we have the social contract, which of course the basic social contract is marriage, to force the guy to stick around to raise his own kids. It's worth pointing out that Jean-Jacques Rousseau was living in exile in Switzerland because he was wanted for multiple accounts of child support from many women that he... So in many ways, the social contract is autobiographical, but he's saying, yeah, men are just awful. We're the biggest jerks ever. His strategy was to find a rich woman, hook up with her, and then he'd just stay with her until he knocked her up and he'd take off. One of the greatest philosophers ever. He is. I love Rousseau, but you have to talk about his personal life because it helps you understand him better. Right? The beauty of what he's saying is what we need to do is create consensus. That when we create civil society, we need to figure out a mechanism to develop consensus and build on the consensus. And it's like, yeah, that's a lovely idea. I can't wait. Let's do it. When do we start? And then we discover Scandinavia did it already. You're like, okay, can we do that? No, we need to be ruled by the rich. So anyway, I've shown you exactly how patriarchal this is, to the point where women were actually conceived of by the ancient Greeks as effectively deformed men. So let me bring in Aristotle into the story. Aristotle says that basically what semen are is an energy source from men, heat. He calls it katamena. And he says that what women are is essentially inert, unliving material. And that what the man does when he has sex is he injects her with this heat. And if he gives her enough heat, then she'll produce a fully formed human, and it'll be a boy. But if he, ate poorly that day, or he worked out too hard earlier in the day, so he doesn't have enough heat, then she'll be the baby will be a deformed female. In other words, the founders of our civilization were profoundly misogynistic. They had contempt for what a woman was. This wasn't passive. This was a profound hatred, right? Women were subhuman in their minds. The Greeks and the Romans did not think that women were fully human. And we have carried that on into our civilization. And we crushed the civilization that did think women were fully human, the Egyptian civilization. For 2,000 years, it didn't rule itself, right? Egypt finally had an Egyptian ruler in 1952, 31 BC to 1952. That's how thoroughly Egypt got crushed. Mohammed Najib, the first president of Egypt, he was half Sudanese, half Egyptian. So he's half black, half Arab. That was the first Egyptian ruler of Egypt in almost 2,000 years. So, I'm going to invoke Plato again, though. I'm going to make an argument for the opposite. So in the Republic, Plato says, you must educate women with men. Now, I've already shown you what he said in the symposium, that women are incapable of agape. But he basically says women are capable of talent. So if you don't educate women in common with men, and don't give them the chance to express that talent, you've lost a portion of your talent. So I don't know exactly what percentage of women he thought were capable of talent. Let's say a woman is half as likely as a man, for purposes of having numbers. So let's say 20% of our men are talented, which means 10% of our women will be talented. So his argument is, if you don't train the women, then you're losing 5% of your talent, 33% of your talent, because there'd be 5 points, right? Because women are half the population, men are half the population, so there are 10 points. So 15% of your population is talented, 5 from the women, 10 from the men. You lost 33% of your talent. What society can afford to lose 33% of your talent? And so his argument was, we can't. So we need to go ahead and give them the benefit of the doubt, even though we know they're inferior. So I ask you now the question, what society can afford to lose a portion of its talent? At this point, the really remarkable thing is women are the majority of college students. And this isn't just the United States. This is true on the whole rest of the planet, including places like Iran. You wouldn't think Iran, but it's something like 60% of the college students in Iran are women. So even in a place where when you think of cruelty, right, a woman has her hair not quite fully covered and the next thing you know, she's dead, that's a level of sadistic cruelty. They are still 60% of their population in college are women. And so we're now at a point where I think as a species we're starting to figure out some things. One of the things that's come forward is women approach the way they deal with other people differently, the way they deal with information differently, the way they deal with leadership differently. There was that whole lean-in thing. Basically, the advice was just be a man but without a penis. Well, we know that's not how women operate usually. Women come into the workplace with compassion. That's their default setting. I'm not saying there aren't women who are incapable of compassion. There totally are, of course, just like there are men capable of compassion, but the compassion is the default setting. And so one of the things that women tend to do is when women are in a workplace setting, they tend to bring people together. They tend to make more conversation. They tend to ask questions that are more caring. And the reason why that matters, of course, is we now know, now that we've let women into the workplace, is productivity levels rise. So, for example, there was a Gallup poll done recently that said that when people are kind to each other in the workplace, how do people react? And productivity rises in such a meaningful way that having a friend in the workplace, by the way, 700% productivity increase. In other words, having a person say, I care about you, and bring compassion in the workplace has an obvious direct advantage in the workplace. And of course, men's default setting is to be the opposite, to be competitive, to push back against each other. It's not that men are always that way, but that's the default setting. It's my default setting. I'm very competitive. I just went to Dubai and I just did a World Government Summit talk, and my talk has the 4th most views, and I'm keeping track. I mean, it's terrible. There were 200 speakers and I'm in 4th place, right behind Elon Musk, by the way. He has 11,000 views and I have 5,500. But I have 2.5 times as many views as the guy in 5th place. So I'm like, yeah, I'm with the big boys now, and that's where I go. Now, is it healthy? Probably not, especially because it doesn't look like I'm going to catch Elon. Not that I haven't been trying. And like I play this war game with my friends that the rules are like this thick. It's insane. Only a completely demented person would play this thing. It's World War II. The units are 10 men. They're squad level. It's illness, probably. There's something wrong with us, the group of us who do this. And we just want to destroy the other guy. We can't wait to destroy the other guy. And we're really good friends. We love each other. We can't wait to be with each other and destroy them. and so at some level, like I see this in myself, and I totally recognize this. But it's not that women are incapable of competition. It's just sort of there's this default setting thing that we do with each other, and part of it is the fact that the effect that estrogen and testosterone have on us. Testosterone does make men aggressive, and for the record, we know a little dumber. There's just no 2 ways about it. I'm going to invoke my friend Joanne. So, Joanne was my mentor when I was a kid. For about 4 years, I had a mentor from like age 12 to 16. At one point, Joanne and her partner Sandy decided that I needed somebody to guide me. So it was like this really powerful moment in my life because I had somebody. And like my dad was an alcoholic, so by that point in my life, I didn't have a dad in my life. And my mom was an ITD nurse, trying to make ends meet, working really hard. So even though she was there for me as much as she could be, it was hard for her to give me that kind of attention. So it was amazing to have Joanne in my life. And Sandy. Joanne was brilliant. Like, she had this insane mind. Just crazy. And in '89, I was living in Germany, and she was in Colorado. I went back to visit friends. And Sandy pulls out this newspaper, and it's got a picture of Joanne on the cover. And Sandy goes, I want you to read this. And I go, okay. And it says, Joanne Conti, Arvada City Council woman, used to be a man. And I read it, and I look at Sandy, and I go, okay, yeah, that's interesting. And Sandy goes, wait, what? Why aren't you freaking out right now? And I go, I think I've always known. Here's what I discovered from Joanne's little story. So she had been in the Korean War. Not fascinating? And she joined the Air Force when the Air Force was first made. So she's like one of the first ever airmen. And she was brilliant. She'd read whole textbooks, memorize them. But she hadn't gone into puberty. When she was 21, she finally started puberty. Well, he started puberty, because she was still he at the time. And it was a train wreck. When that testosterone kicked in, she couldn't read. Her intellect disintegrated. Now, it turns out she had a strange illness, and the illness was that she was probably a chimera or something of that nature. She had the endocrine system of a woman, and by the way, the skeletal structure of a woman. She had hips, and she had narrow shoulders. She was still pretty big for a woman, but she definitely had like a little bit of a womanly shape, and then male genitalia. And once that testosterone kicked in, it just shut her brain down. And so the way the doctors initially treated him was to give him estrogen to counteract the testosterone. And he had to drop out of college until he got the estrogen. Then he went back to college, but now he's growing breasts, so he had to start wrapping them. And his health was disintegrating, and he was dying. And when he was on his fourth marriage, I think it was 1973, the doctors came to him and said, "You are dead, dude. There's no way you're going to live unless we cut your testicles off. They got to go." And then he went, "At that point, do you want to just be a woman and get it over with? We think you are. You just somehow ended up with testicles and a penis. We'll just go the rest of the way." And Joanne went, "Sure." And Sandy was the third wife. The fourth wife left her, and the third wife moved in, and they spent 50 years together with Joanne as a woman. And the lesson I learned was, man, testosterone is crazy. Testosterone is crazy. Now, for the record, once I reach that point where I start producing oxytocin, I'm gonna start taking testosterone to cancel it, because I don't want to be mellowed out. Like, I can't imagine being happy. It's not in it for me. Just no, we're not doing that. I need to be angry and edgy, and that's how that's going to go. But for the most part, I get it. Like, I get why you would want to level this off. Here's the point. I feel like there's so much stuff to cover. So, how are we doing for time? Hold on, I got this. Okay, we're running out of time. So one of the lies we've been taught is that women are emotional and men are rational. It's a bold lie. It's just, there's nothing true about it at all. But it's built into our psychology. We even make fiction characters like this, that men are rational and women are emotional. It turns out that our brains have two parts. There's an emotion center and a rational center. Our conscious mind is rational. So the mind that you have, okay, so when you stop talking, do you notice a voice starts to kick in and your mind starts to, that's actually your conscious mind. Your conscious mind, it has diarrhea of the mouth, can't stop talking, it has language, it's actually a little dumb, it's a little slow, but it is rational and it wants to take things in steps. Your emotion center is a supercomputer. It's the subconscious mind. It can calculate huge amounts of information instantaneously and give it to you. The problem is it doesn't possess language. So the subconscious, when it talks to you, doesn't actually talk to you with words. It gives you an emotion. In other words, if you cut off your emotion center, you're cutting off the smart part of your brain. But we need the rational part of our brain, because the rational part of our brain, first of all, it's the conscious part of our brain, so it's the part of our brain that we feel like we are, so it's us. It's not that the subconscious isn't part of us, it's totally part of us as well. It's just the conscious one is the part that's actively trying to figure things out. It's the part that goes, geez, I need to lose some weight, or it's the part that goes, I'd really love to read some philosophy, or it's the part that says, wouldn't it be great to have shrimp today? That's that part. That's the lovely part. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's a little dumb. You want the motion center. But because of the way we've set up our society, the sexism that we've built into our society, we've made it so that the emotional part is women, and we beat the emotions out of boys. I literally had to go to therapy to learn how to cry. Because by the time I was an adult male, I had basically, now I cry like that. I actually almost lost it in class the other day. So embarrassed. I just stared at the board for a while until I got my composure back. I don't know if you caught me doing that. It's like, oh crap, I'm gonna lose it. Chick flick, I'm gone. I'm like weeping, I'm weeping. Here's my point. Every single person potentially brings something wonderful and beautiful to our community, in the way and the shape that their personality wants to bring them into the community. They might be introverted, they might be extroverted. They might be, really quick to emotion, they might be really slow to it. They might be compassionate and they want to bring people together and they want to compliment people, or they might be kind of angry all the time, whatever it is. If you have a society that lets people be whatever they were supposed to be without trying to crush them and lets them become the thing that they were meant to be, people are not only going to be happier, but people are going to not only be better adjusted, they're going to achieve more in their lives. Trying to take everybody and squish them into some kind of imaginary role means you're crushing out the personality. It means you're crushing out our apple nature. And that's the danger with patriarchy. Societies that rely heavily on patriarchy, that crush women, that make women into whatever you expect them to be, you're wiping out whole segments of your talent pool. You're making misery and suffering. The fact that there's actually some dumbass out there saying I'm a misogynist is profound. I want him to walk up to his mom and say, I'm a misogynist, I hate women, because that's what that means. And then watch the reaction his mom gives him. She slaps him across the face. What does that mean? How do you hate a portion of the species? Here, alpha males. This is the conversation I keep hearing pop up. So for the record, this is really funny to me. They should have done more research on wolves before they adopted the term. The researcher who came up with the idea of alpha males in the 70s was researching wolves in captivity. Well, wolves in captivity were coming from 15 different places. They weren't from the same pack. So they had different cultures. They were from different packs. They probably didn't even speak the same wolf language. They're now in this human environment where they have to figure out how to operate together. What did they do? They adopted human culture. And they set up two alphas, an alpha male and an alpha female. The betas that were the subservient, follow the rules dogs, because right, they're dogs. And then the gammas, the ones they exiled. When we've studied wolves in the wild, they have all that. They do have alpha, beta, gamma, but not in that way. The alphas, the alpha male and the alpha female, are the mom and dad of the pack. Wolf packs are families. It's not really an alpha male and an alpha female. It's just mom and dad. The 12 wolves that are in this pack are just the kids. In other words, the wolf pack isn't this hierarchical thing where you're crushing the other animals and making them subservient to you. It's your family and you love them. Wolves are capable of an enormous range of emotions, including love. By the way, we know exactly where dogs, there was a thing, dogs aren't capable of love. It's not true. We now know when they see their owner, I don't own my dog. She owns me, if anything. When dogs see their human partner, that's more accurate. The part of their brain that lights up is the exact same part of our brain when we experience love. So there's zero doubt dogs are completely capable of love. Wolves are completely capable of love. They love each other. When a gamma does happen in the wild, it's because one of the wolves pissed off the pack and the pack is punishing them by exiling them. And by the way, wolves have forgiveness and they will let gammas back in, just for clarity's sake. When these men, these toxic men, are walking around calling themselves alpha males, they mean the wolves in captivity, not the wolves in the wild. So for the record, I'm totally an alpha male, but wolf in the wild alpha male. My goal in my life is to make my wife shine. My goal in life is to support her and let her become the person that she was meant to be. And she's doing the same thing for me because she happens to also be an alpha. Everybody's capable of being an alpha because in the wolf packs, eventually the parents die off and those wolves will go off and create their own packs and become their own alphas. There's no, I'm an alpha and you're a beta. That's only humans are cruel and sadistic and do that to each other. Wolves would never dream of something so nasty. Who would do that? Why would you do that? Why would you want somebody to be subordinate to you for all eternity? We should be trying to lift each other up. And 51% of the species of women, to be a masculine man who's confident and not envious or jealous, because that's where a lot of this is coming from. The way you show that is by making your community stronger. The way you make your community stronger is by making the individual stronger. When I die, I know there will be a lasting legacy because I will have made somebody else's life better, and that's the ripple effect that gives me immortality. If I crush somebody, that's a really crappy immortality. Immortality comes from my ability to make my community better by lifting people up. So what I want us to do is all be alpha males and alpha females and take care of each other and stop letting this toxic thing that people are like, whatever, penis is this big is what that's about. Stop being a small penis man. Just be a real human being and start caring about people. Compassion, stewardship. Stewardship means care. It means you care about people. It comes from the word guard, the same root word that guard or guardian comes from. The idea is that you're not dominating the other person, you're uplifting the other person. And I'm done, we're out of time. And I probably spent too much time on the front, but I always do, so nobody's surprised about that. Anyway, thanks for doing this and being here with me.